Michelle, obviously, Inside Out 2. What a movie. A critical success, a box office smash, and it's something that obviously has pulled at our heartstrings, and it's a film we love, right?
Oh, absolutely. And you always wonder with sequels, are they going to really come through and hit? But this one just checked all the boxes, and such a fabulous film.
Yeah, I mean, we love the first one. We thought the first one was great. The second one may be even better. It's hard to say,
right.
but it hit on so many key points. And those key points are the reason we wanted to bring some of the people on that we have with us on the show today, right, Michelle?
Exactly.
Yeah. So you've heard them all on our show before. They're actually some of our family, but they have some interesting ties into where we feel that they can get some insight into this film as well. One of them is a licensed social worker, deals with emotions, deals with therapy. So, you have that view.
Right.
We have a teenager here. So that is another look at it.
Right.
And then
very important perspective.
And then we have my emotional doppelganger who we don't see movies together anymore because the theaters, I think, got tired of mopping up our tears afterwards. But I know that he probably felt the same way I did as we went through this film and many, many films. Welcome back to the Hyperion Adventures podcast. Chris, Joyce, Zach, so glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Awesome to be here.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing, when you're talking about everybody and their perspectives, I'm sure you all will bring some unique, different ways of how this film touched on you. And one thing I don't think we mentioned with Chris is, being the dad of teenagers is also something that I'm sure as you were watching the movie, kind of tugged at you maybe in some other ways as well. So I just want to put that out there that all great.
Yeah, there's lots of thanks to me, Michelle. Thank you for acknowledging.
They're going to hit it from all sorts of angles. Yeah. So I think this is going to be a fun and interesting conversation as we approach this film, maybe in a different way than just a standard review. There will be spoilers here. I have no doubt. So if you haven't seen, I don't know if you haven't seen Inside Out 2, you're one of the few, but if you haven't, you may want to maybe see it and then come back to this. But either way, I think this will be an interesting look at this film, right?
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So we're kind of going to go through this and just kind of go through different thoughts about the film. First of all, we just want to get what all three of your impressions were of it, just in general, of watching this movie.
I like I said, I thought it was a perfect little movie. As you mentioned, the first one, I felt like when I saw it, I thought this movie was made for me. It's about emotions and the way that they're able to portray it. And I had high hopes for the second one. I was scared to be disappointed. And I was really happy and surprised to know that it hit on so many levels. And it really was able to portray emotions visually in a way that I thought really kind of captured how even I feel as someone who's anxious or something like that, And I just spent a couple of days with one of my best friends, and we had just seen she had just seen the movie too. And we spent a lot of our time together talking about how it very much represented how we feel inside too. So I thought it was a great movie and just very well done through and through. So, yeah.
Chris, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it hit all the notes. I mean, like you said, Tom, like high expectations, and I'm typically skeptical of sequels, unless it's Godfather 2. That's a perfect movie. But this one, I agree, it was just as good as the first one. And the crazy thing is, it only represented 2 days, all the emotions that you felt. And I think the Inside Out movies to me are so great because I recognize myself as a kid in some of those moments. But then as a parent, you get the other perspective and it just rounds it all out. And like you said, Tom, of course I was a wreck by the end.
What about you, Zach?
I really enjoyed it. I really like the first movie. It's one of my favorite Pixar movies, and hearing that they were making a sequel, I was skeptical, but also very excited at the same time. A lot of the times, as a teenager, when you hear that they're going to make a movie about teenagers, you're a little bit skeptical. You're like, how are they going to portray us? But talking to my friends and, watching the movie myself, looking back on the movie, I think it did a really good job about like what it is to be a teenager and kind of what that represents.
Excellent. Well, kind of, going off on that, Zachary, coming from your perspective of being a teenager, what characters or emotions that they portrayed you felt related most to you, and why?
Um, well, I'm gonna have to say ennui. Day to day, whether it's me waking up way too early in the morning or just me not wanting to do anything, I do feel that. But I feel the best emotional representation that the movie kind of had on what it is to be a teenager is kind of all the emotions going crazy at once. How there was no like one stable, controlled emotion, and how they were all kind of freaking out simultaneously. And I thought that kind of combination of emotions kind of represents, those weird years. And I felt like that was most representative of, what people are like.
Yeah.
What about you, Joyce? I mean, as a social worker, someone that deals with therapy, I mean, dealing with some of this, especially with, anxiety kind of taking the reins over here. I mean, I think that we talk about this as a teenager, and it's teenager, but I think we all feel that at different times. So what did you feel about how that kind of was portrayed?
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, it's a really great visual representation of how anxiety can really take control, like she's taking control of the board, right? And that's something I've actually worked with a lot of my clients that, anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing, right? There's some good parts of anxiety. It can actually motivate you. It can actually, keep you focused on things. But do we want to be, as I talk to my clients all the time, like, do you want to be 100% anxiety, right? But like, what are you comfortable with? What are you able to kind of find that balance with? And, some people who are normally kind of lean, anxious in general, or fearful, or whatever their main emotion is that they'll never necessarily be at zero. And that's okay. But that it's okay to have a little bit of everything. But what's your comfort level on that? And I found that the fact that at the end, it was so great how they were able to get joy and everyone else to come in and be like, okay, let's take it down a little bit, and like I joke with some people, like I'm good with like 70% of myself being anxious because I just know I run better being an anxious person, but knowing that you have to kind of taper it down sometimes and let other parts of your emotions and who you are take control. And so just showing that that's how they represented it, I thought, wow, what a beautiful way of doing it. And also to show, like, I'm not sure how younger kids would portray it necessarily or kind of really understand it. But I think for adults, we definitely, resonated with us. And it's nice to hear that as a teenager, that they're able to have the capacity to kind of see how that works too.
Well, I think, and we discussed this, I don't know if we discussed it on the show, but definitely off the air, that when you looked at the original Inside Out, it was simpler emotions, it's joy, it's fear, it's sadness, it's anger, etc. It's fear. But, obviously it looked at the people that saw the first film and that they had aged into a different group, and how complex our emotions get as we age, and I think as a teenager and then even as an adult, and how different that can be. And I think that this film just really expressed that in a way that, one, as adults we can totally relate to it, but also I think that kids and teenagers can enjoy it as well. I don't know if you guys would agree with that.
I mean, at the end of the first movie, the way it resonated, how sadness, the colors would mix in the memory balls. It wasn't just red, it wasn't just blue, but they had a mixture of colors. I felt they built on top of that, which kind of led into what created this movie, right? And to show that there's a lot more emotions. We are complex human beings, and that it does take a lot of things to make up who we are.
Right.
I feel like it's like they do in both movies, but it gets more complex in the second one. They do an awesome job of spoon feeding emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Which is can be sort of a weird concept for folks to get their head around. But when you watch the movie, you get it. Like, you understand that this is really about self-awareness. It's not about an emotion is bad or good. It's about, are you aware of where you're at right now? And is that where you be?
Yeah.
And I think that's the beautiful part of it. Like, anxiety is not a bad thing. Like,
No.
I mean,
Yeah, just that judgment, right? Because sometimes people like to label ourselves as bad or good, or very kind of binary when we look at things like that. But to show that there's a scale and of how you can feel these type of emotions.
And I think we see that from the emotions themselves, especially like Joy. I mean, we see her at one point kind of lose it a little bit. It's like, yes, I want to be happy all the time, but I cannot be happy all the time. She kind of goes through her own little emotional distress and emotional moment within the film as well. And so that's kind of interesting to see that, basically these emotions are rubbing off on them, on each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't think about that. That's true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of joy, I mean, when you think of kids, right? They're happy, they laugh at everything, and joy is such a major component. And then you enter into that, the teenage years or whatever, and you're experiencing change on top of change of your feelings, change of your life. So, Chris, from a parent perspective, how does that resonate with you, and how do you utilize some of your talents and skills in dealing with a family that has kids going through all these types of emotions and the changing into more of a grown up or an adult world?
Yeah, in the first movie, I had my own version of sadness because, as our kids were we're about kind of the same age as I think her in the movie,
Mhm.
that I missed the days when it was so simple, right? Like, it was like I said, it's very easy to just sort of stay on one emotion, and if it's a healthy environment, a lot of times it's joy for kids. Not always, but a lot of times. And so it made me miss those sort of days where, man, it used to just be so simple to get there. And as an adult, it's fun. As a dad, it's fun to like re-enter that world of just being a kid again.
Right.
That's a lot of the fun of being a parent for me. And then, as we went into the second movie, that it's an accurate depiction of how we experienced teenagers. To me, it reinforced something that Joyce and I talk a lot about now, where the kids are older, so I come home from work and they're not running to the door and giving dad a big hug, like, understandably, right? They've got a lot of other things, priorities and things going on in their life. And so for us, it's a lot about sort of value versus volume. It's not about spending all the time with your kids, because whether I like it or not, like, they don't want to hang out with me all the time anymore. But it's about sort of meeting them where they're at. Right. So, like, what are the things in this crazy mix of emotions that we all are, and teenagers especially,
Mhm.
what are the things that they're really interested in, and where are they at right now? And sort of how can I get involved in some things that we can enjoy together? And so that's sort of what was in my head as I was watching the movie.
Yeah, very good.
So Zach, working on that subject, I mean, you've already talked about how you felt. You've spoken with some other of your friends and your peers, how this film kind of fit how your age group has kind of been going through, and it kind of made sense to you all. How do you think that the film's themes kind of fit that world, and maybe affect how you go through things on a day by day basis?
I think the nice thing about the film, and even the one prior, is although they're showing you that the brain is so complex and has all these different complexities working through it, they simplify it. They turn each emotion into a character. They turn kind of each part of who you are into a physical thing. So I think the best lesson that I've learned from those films, and I think other people have, are just stopping and taking their brain apart for a little bit and categorizing it into these little things, and being able to see where some emotions come from, where some actions come from, and just how it makes up who you are.
Yeah, back to that self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
Like, the anger,
Yeah.
right? Like, the anger when
You're
she's playing
more
hockey,
reactionary.
like, can help her.
Yeah.
Like, she can be, sort of more
Right.
assertive.
Right.
Uh,
Joyce, from a social worker perspective now, we have these tools now of seeing these emotions not only as characters, but as colors. Is that something that is useful in the world of social work and dealing with people with emotions, or maybe even younger people who may not have as keen of an ability to really verbalize what their emotions are. You know, I feel this, right? You know, I feel angry, or I feel anxious, or envy.
Yeah, I mean, I normally work with older adults and
Mhm.
kind of at the other spectrum, but I do recall from like working with school age children and all of that is when kids don't have the able to verbalize how they're feeling or be able to express exactly what is, you know, going through their heads. You know, we talk about like, why don't you draw something out? What do you see? How's that making you feel? Or we go through ideas of just what are you feeling in your body? Is your throat closing up? You know, are you feeling hot? You know, so to be able to take what they use color and they use characters in this movie, right? But when you're working with kids, sometimes it's about using other physical attributes that you might be able to understand, you know, or what do you want to do? How do you want to express it? Do you want to stomp your feet? Do you want to go screaming? You know, so being able to not use the word anxiety or fear or something like that that we understand, but what do you want to do? How do you want to show it? How do you want to color it? How do you want to draw it? Something like that, you know, and even just showing like when you're angry, you know, you can show how deep a pencil can go, right? You can break a pencil when you're really upset about something like that. So being able to take that information and use it to show how that relates to what you're feeling inside is a great way for kids to kind of navigate that, right? And to be able to understand, okay, this is something what it is. Now, what do we do with it? You know, and again, I think it'd be interesting to kind of almost like do a study on a kid who sees it at like 5 versus 10 versus 15 to see if there's like a way of them kind of seeing it differently too. But I think again that depiction of color and being able to use that was really, you know, it's clear on all levels.
I found it interesting how the film, you know, again, Joy, even though she learned some lessons from the first movie, it was obvious that she still wanted this perfect life for Riley. And, you know, even so much that her sense of self, she was like, you don't need these memories. We're going to store those way off in the back. And we're just going to plant these perfect things to build the sense of self. But then, you know, when they realized that this was the only way to come back was to kind of bring everything to it. And that is true of who we all are. Our sense of self is everything that we've gone through at some point that builds what we are. And we're not the one single thing at any one time. It's kind of the way it went. I'm really interested, you know, in all your takes on how that kind of played out and what you feel that was, you know, for people in general.
Yeah, I mean, as a therapist specifically, one of the things that I feel like this movie was really focused on was like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, because one of the things she talks about is her core belief, right? Like I'm not good enough when she's playing hockey. And that's something that I work with on a lot of my clients, right? It's like these core beliefs that we feel about who we are, no matter if they're true or not, but that's what we believe ourselves to be. So I think that was a way of showing that, you know, all the emotions, all of our experiences, everything really build to who we are. But how do we use something like CBT, for example, to help kind of dissuade those beliefs and be able to cope with how we're feeling? Because sometimes we can't control our feelings, right? We can't control what we're thinking. But what do we do? Which is kind of what Zach was saying earlier, was like, stop, slow down. And Chris was talking about being self-aware. And then now how do we approach these issues? You know, and knowing that, you know, just because we might believe it to the core, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're accurate representations of what we're seeing. So
I remember being like, when I was watching the movie, I felt embarrassed because in the beginning, when she throws away the bad memories, I thought, oh, that's a good idea. Like, yeah, she's too young, you know, she knows. And then in the end, I was like, oh, of course, like that's just what makes us who we are. That's and she needs all of that because you're right, Tom. That's absolutely what being you know, a semi-adult to an adult is. That's real life. That makes you who you are, whether you want to get rid of it or not.
And I think the nicest thing about like what the sense of self kind of represented in that movie was the like idea of control. Because it's kind of like a theme that comes up in both the first Inside Out and the second Inside Out, where Joy is trying to kind of control the way Riley's life looks and how and what she sees. So when you see her trying to throw out all the bad memories so that they don't become her sense of self, you kind of have to go back to the first movie and realize that that's the same mistake she made before, but just in a newer and evolved version. So I thought that was really interesting.
Good point.
Well, one thing I just want to discuss really quickly, and it was just a flash in that last scene where they're kind of going through and her new sense of self is there and it's just flashing through all these different things. I'm not good enough. I'm a good person. I do this. I'm great at this. I'm not so great at this. There was just a quick flash, but I thought it was such an important flash in there. It just said quickly, sometimes I need help, and I thought that was such an important self-awareness moment within all these different emotions that we all need to know, is that it's okay for that to be part of who you are, that sometimes you do need to ask people for help. And I know, Joyce, you agree with that completely.
Oh, for sure. I mean, trying to be vulnerable makes us all feel so scary, right? That we're kind of exposed, and to be able to admit that you're not perfect, that you can't do everything, you're not strong enough for everything, is a little scary. But you realize that sometimes when you're able to be vulnerable and to show that you need help, it actually opens you up and reconnects you with other people too, because people also want to help you too, right? So it really develops a beautiful relationship with parents and friends and, really just other people around you.
Right.
I mean, as a recovering perfectionist, man, I wish I had realized that earlier in my life, but it actually does take, some of the more emotionally taxing parts of your life to sometimes realize that.
Right. It kind of like taking what Tom was just saying. The first movie had Riley go through that too, right? Like she finally had to. Oh, I get emotional thinking about it. Get emotional to the point where she asked her parents for help, and kind of went through this as well. But as Zach just said, in a more evolved, more adult type of perspective or older child perspective. So I guess I'd be curious to know if, and you don't have to share anything real personal or anything, but kind of that ending scene where all of those memories come through. When you watch that, or after you saw the movie and thought about it, do you recall in your lifetime having some type of experience like that where you felt like, wow, or maybe like after a good cry or something like that, you finally were able to get yourself in a better position, but you first had to kind of face all of those other areas of your life?
Something you have?
Yeah, I mean, without getting specific, because I don't think we're having a therapy session for me right now.
Yeah, give us a few more minutes.
I do, Michelle, but it's for me like the most helpful times in my life when all of those emotions come like cataloging down, like it did for Riley. It's usually after the most stressful, highly emotional, sometimes really sad things that have happened in my life. And so it's like this movie tries to, I think, sort of reinforce that there's not a bad or a good when it comes to how your life plays out. There's lessons to be learned and to carry forward with. So yeah, absolutely. But it usually wasn't after, I scored the winning touchdown.
Right.
Is maybe on the other side of that coin.
Yeah, I think for me, like when you reflect on, because Chris and I joke about being the recovering perfectionist kind of thing, right? Like we're very high achievers. We feel like things have to be a certain way. And the irony of actually working with other people and being in therapy is like I'm probably the worst client for someone else, right? Because I'm not necessarily always going to follow what's said. But like one of the things I think as being a mother is actually one of the things that brings out the need to ask for help sometimes, right? Like I had him when we were younger, like 29, 30-ish, and I was the first one of my friends to have kids, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing, right? But you're blindly like trying to mother things. But like I think at that time, when I look back on that and I reflect, I think I wish I had asked for help more. I wish I had known even what questions to ask. But you don't know at that time. But at that time, and things have definitely changed now in our culture, but we have this image that like moms have to do this and you have to meet these certain expectations, right? And so at that time, I was still trying to like live up to that type of like facade. And so now, like, as I reflect on that time, like, I wish I had been a little bit more vulnerable and been able to reach out, even just to say, like, help, what the hell I'm doing, but I think he's turned out okay so far, but, as I joke, I will pay for his therapy bills in the future. So
What do you guys think? I mean, the other big key moment, and that I think really hit home with most people that saw this film, was basically how it depicted Riley's panic attack, essentially, when anxiety just completely took over, and how it was completely spinning out of control, and how basically it kind of felt like you felt it in the theater. Like, not only was Riley going through this panic attack, I felt like I was going through a panic attack watching this whole thing go on.
For sure.
Yeah. How do you feel like that came across? I think obviously we're expressing it as we're talking about it, but how do you feel that came across? Was it, and its accuracy portrayed within the film?
Yeah.
I thought it was very well done. I think there were a lot of things, and I'm sure they can talk about it, like the kind of just absurdity in the moment of her just going everywhere at once. And instead of one emotion character, it was like one big cloud of anxiety. But I thought what was most like impactful for me was how they kind of just had to like punch her out of it. Like there was no like soft taking her out of it. They just had to like rip her out of that whole cloud. And there was kind of, and I felt like that was a very nice way of portraying it. Like when you're having these kind of anxiety attacks, there's like it's just like a steam engine like running off course, there's no stopping it. And the only way to stop is you really kind of just got to give it a slap in the face. That's kind of what they did, and I thought that was very interesting the way they portrayed it, but I also thought pretty accurate.
Yeah, actually, I mean, the debilitating feeling was, I agree, Tom. You felt it in the theater, and I think our bodies like tensed up watching the circling around of the board. And you remember those times in your life when that happened to you, right?
You do. I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, I was with one of my best friends, and we both are highly anxious people, but our kind of our favorite, like strangely weird part was when you go into that room and they're thinking about worst case scenarios. And I'm like, oh, that is literally us every day, and again, as a parent, our anxiety levels have actually gone up because you want to like protect these human beings, like with everything in your being, right? And so like all the worst case scenarios are that on top of all the other things you worry about, and so to watch her spinning into this cloud was just like, yep, I get it. I totally am there. I've been there. We've all been there. And that was, I think, was amazing. I think every single person in that theater could connect at one time or another that we've been in a stage where we felt a little out of control, that our emotions were taking over. But be it a slap in the face or whatever it is, you do need something to kind of pull you out of that. But it's possible, it's you can move from that,
I guess the first one she had like a emotional shock. It was like the lack of all emotions.
Yeah.
And then she had to come into the present, and then
Right.
This one was one emotion going out of control.
Yeah.
They can make like 20 of these things.
I know.
mean, like brain's complex. Like there's a lot of material there.
By the way, I love the worst. I didn't think about it until you brought it up, Joyce. The worst case scenario room where they're just bringing up all these things. There's so, I know that's going to be rewatchable like 100 times. You're going to pick out so many little Easter eggs in that. It was so well done.
My room is like the size of a warehouse. That's why I'm like, oh yeah, I get that.
Well, and just with the anxiety, I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I was just saying, by the way, the size of the sarcasm.
Oh my God.
For our two kids, it's at least the Grand Canyon at this point.
Yeah. I know. And the way they portrayed not just the worst case scenario, but each decision is going to make such a lasting impact on your life, and how that emotion that we all feel that at times, like, oh my God, I got to make the right next decision because I could just blow it for everything else.
Yeah. And that's a lot about kind of being present and just focusing on like day-to-day kind of things, right?
Right. So kind of maybe on a lighter mode now. Would you share with us some of your favorite scenes or favorite characters and why?
I liked embarrassment. I mean, he didn't have to say much, but man, that's exactly how it feels. It was just so funny to see him go into a sweatshirt.
Oh my God.
And like that's exactly what I want to do in those situations. Yeah, I thought it was cute and funny and I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Zach?
I think my favorite would be the ennui moments and just kind of how ennui is just so nonchalant about every moment, but when ennui does come in, it like randomly solves everything, and it's like, oh wait, this just fixed all my problems, and I thought that was really funny. And I also love nostalgia.
Oh my God.
Nostalgia.
We've been thrilled, and then they'd all be, nope, go away. It's not. Yeah. Thought that was fun.
Oh God. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I felt like that was a peek into the next movie or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
Chris actually mentioned the sarcasm part. Actually, I was laughing it out loud so much on that just because it just took me by surprise and the way that they portrayed it, that you're saying something really what you think is gentle, right? Like, can you guys do this? And it comes out like, oh, right? Like the attitude that comes back at you. So again, really small moment, but it really, really portrayed exactly how I feel.
Yeah. Well, and now with communicating a lot through text and everything, don't you feel that that is also sometimes where we have these misperceptions because there isn't the body language or the tones of the
No
voice,
context. Yeah.
no context. You're just seeing parts of words or whatever, and the same kind of thing. How is it being received? Is it
So funny you mentioned that, Michelle. We just had a conversation like last week because I had to get the kids to be like, can you educate me on how to text? Because I'll use like exclamation points or ellipses, and they're like, too many exclamation points. It's aggressive. I'm like, oh, I was trying to show enthusiasm. I had to get the primer on how to text with a teen, and I clearly.
Yeah.
okay? You need to write a book now.
Yeah, I know, right? I already forgot them. That's the problem. I already screwed up. Josh is like, that's too aggressive. I'm like, oh,
The two question marks was too aggressive.
Right?
Too. Like, that means like you really want to know? Like, no, it was just.
I just went it out. I'm excited.
Oh,
Oh.
that's great. That's so,
Yeah.
it's so true. So true. So accurate.
Yeah,
I am worried now because there are times I use question marks and exclamation points. It's like, oh man, how
you
is
have
that?
to know your audience, right? To us, we would get it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
to them, it might be different.
Oh,
What was it,
God.
like big paragraph versus multiple?
I told them to stop using punctuation with text. It's passive aggressive.
What does that period mean?
Very final.
Exactly. Who knew? I was just doing my grammar that my teachers taught me. Clearly, it was all wrong.
And I'm just past the not double spacing between sentences.
I still do that, Michelle.
At least they don't sign their text.
Oh man.
Oh, God.
So, Zach, looking back at this film and thinking about it, how do you think that, and I don't know how you said that some of your friends and peers saw this film and enjoyed it, but how do you think they would use it maybe in a life to kind of, navigate through growing up and going through, you're a young adult now moving into full adulthood? How do you think this film would help that process?
I think the best way I can like put it is just like using it for kind of like retrospect. Like, especially with like the whole franchise, like the first and the second movie, I just am at that random age where like I kind of grew up in the same like time frame. Like I was that young kid when the first one came out, and then now I'm a teenager when the second one came out. So I feel like kids, especially my age, can kind of look back on those two movies and be like, huh, that's where I was X amount of years ago, and this is where I am now. And then, if there's a third or fourth or fifth, then who knows where I'll be then.
So Chris, I'm curious to think, were there takeaways from this film for you that maybe you either thought about in terms of your parenting, or something that you may not have, a concept or something you may not have thought before the film and thought, oh, this is good insight, or this might be helpful?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me, Michelle, is as much as I try to think that I put myself into the mind of a teenager, and and when kind of things happen, you're like, you just kind of write it off. That's a teenager. I think this made me appreciate and remember the real complexities of how everything is firing at the same time, and you don't know sort of how to sort them, and to be aware enough of where of how they're controlling you. So that was actually very helpful.
And Joyce, I mean, obviously we love this film. Lots of people have seen this film, but I gotta believe, I know I believe this. I know Michelle believes this. I would imagine you believe this too, that this could be a very good tool that parents and adults can use to kind of go through kids' emotions as they grow up. I think that you would agree with that. And do you see that as a possibility?
Of course. Yeah, I definitely think that parents can use this, like Chris was saying, as a reminder to what these kids are experiencing at the time. And that it is hard, being a teenager. And, I just, when I try and like work with the kids, like we have to really put ourselves in their shoes sometimes and remember, like, okay, I remember being embarrassed about like the dumbest stuff. Like as an adult, you can kind of laugh at it, right? But to remember that like the funniest look, the single hair out of place can just destroy your whole entire day, so I think definitely it's a good reminder. It's actually more for parents probably than for the kids, to get reminded that these are things that they're going through, and to hopefully that they pause also to remember that kids are having a tough day, and that sometimes we have to give them a little bit of space and grace to kind of emote and go through it. But that in the end, that as long as they feel like they're in a safe, trusting environment to express themselves and kind of whatever they have to do to get through it, that's probably the better, situation for them.
You're probably hearing us say this and you're like, you guys don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, like
whatever.
You get it, but you don't get it.
You missed the point.
I know, maybe we should do like an after interview with just Zach.
Talk about situational awareness.
We're trying.
So obviously, all three of you, we did too. We all loved the film. Are there any final points you guys want to touch on? I mean, I know we touched on a lot already, but is there anything that kind of summarize things that you think that are really, really important about Inside Out 2 that really need to be expressed?
It's not really, I don't know if this is really important, but one thing I think is interesting is that Riley is a female, and there actually are gender differences too when it comes to emotions, right? And it'd be interesting to see if they kind of go into other genders and other differences or other people might be experiencing, and what emotions can come through in that way too. Because even though we all have kind of the same names for emotions, how are they actually experienced by different individual people? So.
Yeah, I would just say this is Disney at its best for me. I mean, it just appeals to, as far as I can tell, all ages and types of audiences. And so I want them to make more movies like this. This is,
we want to see Riley through the years.
Yeah, make Inside Out 20. I'm in.
Yeah.
Zach, any final thoughts?
Going off of this is Disney at its best, I have to agree with that. Because I mean, just the ability, when you compare Disney to other companies and other like animated movies, the ability of Disney to tell a story while also entertaining you is really unparalleled for me. So I think they did a great job keeping with that standard with this movie.
Well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Very well said.
Yeah. We loved it. I mean, obviously you guys loved it very much. It was such a great film, and so happy that you were able to join us and be willing to join us and kind of give this interesting perspective from various different sides. I mean, obviously we could talk about it all day, but to get a licensed social worker, to get a father of two teenage sons, to get a teenager to discuss it. I really think it was an interesting point of view, right, Michelle?
Yeah, we're, obviously we're very honored that you took the time to do this, but you brought a richness to the discussion that you can't get otherwise. And I think that's, it's definitely great for us. I think it's great for our listeners as well. And it's just like I said, I think you can go in and enjoy a movie, and then when you have the dialogues and you get so much more out of it. And like I said, the three of you bring such great, unique perspectives to the discussion. So it's awesome.
I forgot we're on a podcast. I thought we were like around this table. Yeah. It's fun to talk about. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. It's been a really good discussion, and we love you guys, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Love you too.
Hope to see you soon in person.
Yes.
Thanks, Tom, Michelle.